What's up, horror family? I am here to do sort of a recap, summary of some of the main stuff that we talked about last week. So the week of April 6th and your questions. I apologize already because I know there's a glare in my glasses, but this is how I can read your posts and also my notes about what to say. So sorry if this is messing with you, but this is the best. It's the best I have right now. So good discussion. Really enjoyed reading these things. I try and get on every day, and even if I'm not commenting every day, I'll at least get to read where we are. So it felt like there was a really good sustained discussion. We're kind of finding our legs here. As we're getting closer, this first question that was asked was about does the way that religion is presented in this novel, does it remind you of how religion is today? And I liked this discussion a lot because we kind of got a little personal with it. Cameron talking about her background, and a lot of us in the South grew up with these kind of parochial or spiritual or a blend of spiritual education and also public education, private education. It's a good discussion. Cameron is talking about some of the things that she's been watching with the Laramie Project, and also growing up with religion being forefront in her life. We talked about Jesus Camp, which I think maybe that was Cecilia who first brought it up, but I mean that's a really good thing to watch in thinking about the way religion is presented, and especially how religion is presented to children, because this is one of the connections that I wanted to make that you guys were getting really close to, which is that one of the ways that this can be manipulative or this can be exploitive is that it's exploiting some of that basic innocence that children have, and also their desire just to learn, and their ignorance, and so fulfilling that ignorance with, or putting that ignorance into whatever we can indoctrinate them with. So there's something in that Jesus Camp documentary that speaks to that. And here you have a character like Tarwater, who all of these people, is like a vessel that all these people are trying to pour themselves into for selfish reasons. And so whether it's spiritual education or it's the secular education of Raber, it's not really done to educate him. It's done in order to, as a kind of a self-fulfillment or self-aggrandizement. So really good discussion throughout that one. The second one is, there was this question, but there's another question. I'm going to kind of synthesize them, which is that the first question was about Tarwater's education through storytelling, and then the second one was something about the way storytelling affects consumption of this story. And a really good discussion here, Ben, particularly talking about the different conflicting stories that the young man is getting, and the way that Southern education is religious learning is done through storytelling. And of course, that is really a lot of what spiritual education is, or teaching the Bible is. These parables, or these stories we learn through stories. We tell a story and then find ourselves. And so a lot of that is kind of bound up in a kind of a spiritual education. And then Katie had this really good point about who is the narrator. So that's always something when whatever story you're being told, whether it's a biblical story or whether it's just a story that your friend is telling you about their day, who is the person that has authority and authorship over that narrative? And then what does that say about the subject, right? So that we're always kind of suspicious. And as English majors, I think we got something good here, because we're always naturally asking these questions. We're always a little bit suspicious of narrative. We're always trying to question and tease out who's in authorship, who's in authority, who's in a position of power, what are they obfuscating, what are they hiding. But when you're a child, that's not something that you necessarily ask. And so there's a lot of ways for exploitation and storytelling. And then just to connect this to the way that we receive this, I really liked Meredith's comment here about truth and what is the truth. And we're constantly sort of trying to tease out, also because Tarwater's so naive. He doesn't have book learning. He doesn't have street learning. He just has this spiritual learning. So we as we as authors, it's been a long day. We as readers are able to sort of mediate the things that he's seeing and commenting on, and that disruption or that gap between them. We're able to see that in a way that he can't see, and maybe some of the other characters can't see. And that's, kind of a classic Flannery O'Connor technique, is that we as the people who are witnessing this have that knowledge and have that power, but also have to face the horror of knowing something that they don't know, or knowing that this is going to end badly. And so that kind of natural distrust, or that gap between the reader and what he or she is reading, is kind of textbook Flannery O'Connor. Really great discussion there. We talked a little bit about this divide between the country and the city. Avery had a really good comment here about the city kind of is this place of fear and anger. They're not very social. They're sort of cut off, even though it's a space where everybody exists. It's a space where nobody interacts. Whereas the country has less pejorative connotations. It's more isolating, but at the same time, there's a sense of community that is there, whatever that community is. And so I don't think it's setting up in this way, and O'Connor is certainly not someone who's going to do this to say the country is this side of sort of spiritual beauty, and it's where God resides in nature. Now, O'Connor's certainly not one of those people, but also on the other hand, she's also not someone that's privileging the city as a site of, whatever it is, release or revelation. These spaces are just as isolating for her. Remember, O'Connor is someone who started out really a part of that New York writing scene, wanted to become a writer, was in the urban environment and very much flourishing, and then of course suffering from disseminating lupus, had to come back and live with her mother in the country. So she's someone who's experienced both of these extremes, and I think finds both of them isolating. Good discussion there. Talked about Southern fatherhood. This was particularly moving to me. We get personal in this class, which I quite like. Kieran's comment here, I think, is really good, that we have this hyper-patriarchal society in the South, and so the father is sort of the center of that, both within the universe, these different universes that patriarchs sort of pop up in, whether it's the very, very small community of the family, or if it's the larger of the leader, governor, whatever, religious leader, political leader, that we always have this kind of patriarch and this notion of a patriarch. And what's interesting is that patriarch, whether it's something on a macro level or something on a really micro level, there's so much in common with the stereotypes, or with the ideas of what we think of what a good father would be versus what a good preacher would be, or what a good leader politically would be. Those cross over a lot. And I think in the South, one of the reasons is that we do have this kind of origin of a patriarchal society that is still grinding that gear and is not slipping as much as it is in other regions. And there was a good discussion about why that is. And in fact, if I can find it, is it Diana who was like, I want to figure out where did this start, right? She says something like, what started that stereotypical view? Like, is it a book? Is it a cultural idea? I mean, I think there is a dissertation in there, the kernel of an idea, because I think there's a lot to that question of how did this start, or what the origin was. So good discussion there. And then two questions that are related that I'll talk about at the same time, which is Raber and Old Tarwater as father figures, and comparing them to other father figures that we've read, but then also how would we compare them within the novel. And so good discussion there. Zach was sort of first out of the gate to talk about how Old Tarwater reminds him a lot of Grandpa and Mongrels, and that Raber is a lot like Jimmy in a visitation of spirits. Cameron connected Michael from Seeing Unburied Sing, just because he's so unaware of who he is and himself, to Raber. And I think these are good connections. One of the things that I think is true is that while O'Connor certainly has a spiritual agenda with this book, the kind of religious education and the way in which Old Tarwater is educating his nephew is not necessarily something that she would find to be, spiritually instructive in the way that he's doing it. She certainly would have no sympathy for someone like Raber, who was inflicting upon his nephew this kind of intense secularism, human secularism, not because he has any humanity. In fact, I think Raber has the least amount of humanity of anyone in this novel, but really for self-aggrandizement, really for colonialization. So one of the things I think I maybe have commented on, or we're going to get to, is that young Tarwater really does feel like a natural resource that's being exploited by all of these different figures who are trying to use him to sort of seed in him the power or their belief structure or their ideology, not to help him or not to help him grow or to do the things that we think of that are beneficial for children, but really just for self-aggrandizement, really for colonization, really to have a project that they can then replicate themselves. So one of the things that I'll be interested in as we're sort of moving towards the end of the novel in the next couple of weeks is, how does that work? How does that process of colonization work? Does it work? Who wins? Who is the one that can claim ownership over the actions that he does? I mean, there's some pretty dramatic actions that happen in the second half of the book. And who's responsible for that? Is he as the boy responsible? Is it Raber? Is it Tarward? Is it both of them? So it's one of these questions I think that we want to tease out. But anyway, great discussion. You guys are doing so great. I'm so happy to get on there. It feels good to hear your comments and see what you're up to. And I will be back next week, if not before, to talk about what we've talked about this week. All right, bye guys.